Right, more on the broadcasting of BBC Three on television, which came to an end in the early hours of this morning. The final programme to be transmitted was one of the station's biggest hits, Gavin and Stacey. Well, the channel's output is going online only from now on. Earlier, the controller of BBC, Damien Kavanagh, spoke to the Victoria Derbyshire programme, and he said the success of the channel would be measured across a range of platforms.
We're looking across TV, we're looking across iPlayer, we're looking across social media networks, and that's where the audiences are. And the reason we're doing this with BBC Three, a really big part behind it, is we realise that audiences, there's a lot of people who aren't coming to BBC television on a weekly basis in our demographic, in 16 to 34-year-olds, and we're now going to make content and new forms of content and put them onto the social media networks where they are. So, this is a real attempt to kind of fish where the fish were, as it were.
I totally get that, but the BBC Trust, who approved the plan, said this: the closure of the broadcast channel and the reduction in programme budget is being halved to £30 million will make it more difficult for the BBC to reach those aged 16 to 34. So you've got to accept that some young people will be lost to the BBC.
But listen, viewing behaviour of young people is changing massively. We were already losing audiences to young people by remaining on television and losing audiences at ever-increasing rates. What we're trying to do with BBC Three, and the plan behind BBC Three and the rationale behind it, is to try and produce content in different ways and put them in different places to reach those audiences. There's a real danger, I think, for an organisation like the BBC to stay standing still. We're an organisation that has to. We've always been pioneering. When BBC Online launched in the first place, people were saying, why are you taking money away from TV and radio, the things that we do traditionally, and putting it into something that's new and nobody knows how it's going to go? And I think that's what we're doing with BBC Three. Imagine BBC today without an online provision for its audiences. It's unimaginable, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. Yes, we might drop off in the early days, but I'm confident. I've got a brilliant team behind me. I've got absolutely brilliant programme makers producing brilliant content, and I totally believe that content will out. The world is changing and we can't stand still, and that's kind of, as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of it.
Well, joining me is the media commentator Steve Hewlett of BBC Radio 4's Media Show. First of all, what do you make of it?
Well, look, first of all, the thing to say, the BBC is full of creative people, and by and large they do good things when they have a chance to. That's the lesson of BBC Three in its history. It started off as a channel really based around EastEnders repeats and football, with some original content, and it grew in the course of its 13, 14 years to have a substantial reputation for serving young audiences, comedy, Little Britain, Gavin and Stacey, you name it. So I've no doubt that what the BBC are now doing will lead to some really interesting things happening. That said, this is a decision that came straight from financial necessity. It wasn't a decision that they wished to make. They wouldn't have done this if they'd had any other choice, and so they've done it in order to save money. And as is traditional at the BBC, what starts off as the best of a bad job, the needs must solution, is turning into the thing we always wanted to do. So, as is traditional, it's now really about the future. So look, make the best of a bad job. It has a future-facing point to it, but I'll just say one thing. There is one operation in existence amongst numerous others, which unquestionably has a youth audience. It's called Vice. The BBC is desperately worrying about how it is that Vice communicates with these viewers and the BBC doesn't. And Vice up to now has been online only. What is Vice trying to do? Desperately trying to find carriage on traditional TV channels.
So it's going the other way.
Correct.
We've got lots of questions for you. Are you ready? Putting you in the hot seat. John O'Reed on Twitter. Could the BBC cut the budget further for BBC Three if it doesn't perform well online?
Well, theoretically, of course they could. Will they? I think it's highly unlikely, because remember, they've already got a bit of a problem, which is they've taken the content budget from 90 million to less than 30 million, or thereabouts. So it's somewhere between a cut of a half and 2/3. This is already, the young people are already a massively underserved audience in terms of the amount of BBC that they consume. They have to pay licence fees, etc., etc., etc. So they're underserved. So if it doesn't perform online, I think it may be more likely of fire the people running it and hire some new ones, make it work better, make it succeed. It's very unlikely, I would say, that the BBC would get quickly to the point of cutting more resource from it, because, look, politically, there's already an embarrassment. They've cut what they're spending on young people by 2/3. By the way, there's another strategic play in the works, which is that it's perfectly plausible that BBC Three and Radio 1 will end up being merged in a youth service. You heard it here, but that's quite likely.
We'll hold you to it. A text from Dan Revel. Does this move to online for BBC Three mean that other channels might follow, specifically, and he's talking about us, the BBC News Channel?
Well, again, strategically, the BBC thinks, and Tony Hall's going to make a big speech about this at some point in Easter time, we think. Strategically, they think that the future is not channels, it's content, and that the mechanism of delivery is perhaps less important. They look towards a future where more people get their media and get their TV online than via broadcast sources. But here's the thing, as we speak, something like 97% of the consumption of all BBC television is off air, i.e. it's off broadcast. Only 3% is Sky Plus, V Plus and iPlayer, etc., etc. So consumer behaviour is changing, but probably nowhere near as fast as the strategists in their conference rooms in W1A with their whiteboards might imagine. So will other things go online only? In time, quite possibly. It's possible in 30 years' time the whole of the BBC will be online, that broadcasting will be a thing of the past. In the foreseeable future, most unlikely, unless they're forced by cost cutting to move things online that they would rather not.
OK, so Haider Pawani on Twitter says, oh, it's a technical question. I hope you can do this one. Do we need to retune our free view on television now that BBC Three's come to an end?
No, you don't.
No,
you don't.
Yeah.
Although the question of what those video streams, HD, high definition and standard definition, will be used for, that's not clear yet. The BBC have got to go back to the BBC Trust with a proposal, and they've got to agree to it. I mean, we already know that CBeebies, or CBBC, whichever one it is, that's on the BBC Three stream during the day, is going to be extended till 9 o'clock at night. What they do with the rest of the space is up to the BBC to decide. Of course, it's always possible, be a bit of a first, is the BBC could sell it off. But once you've sold it, of course, you can't really get it back.
Oh, people bidding now, won't you? Just on that point, you mentioned CBBC, so I'm going to drop down to what is actually the last question on my list here. Save BBC Three on Twitter is tweeting, if online is the future, why did the BBC want to launch a BBC 1+1 and extend the hours of CBBC?
There is a very good question. The BBC 1+1 is a reflection of how most people still consume most TV. As I say, 97% of the consumption of BBC TV is off air. ITV and Channel 4 have both launched +1s, and they've discovered that it gives them a significant uprating in ratings. Now, it's not just a ratings game. That's telling you there is significant consumer demand, even in the world of the iPlayer, even in the world of on-demand when you want it. There is still significant consumer demand in many households for a +1 channel. So ITV and Channel 4 have found that people used it quite a lot. The BBC wished to follow suit with BBC One. In the end, the Trust told them they couldn't do that. But it shows you the kind of dilemma or the dichotomy. On one hand, invest more in traditional TV services. And by the way, 30 million of what they've saved from BBC Three, which was being spent on young people's programmes, is going to BBC One drama, which, with all due respect, and some of it is absolutely fantastic, is older, is the sort of stuff that you and I like. It's older people's programmes.
So this is savings that's not going to cut or overspend or whatever. They're just moving it somewhere else.
There is a small saving involved in the BBC Three thing if you discount. Look, on the face of it, it's quite a big saving, but quite a lot of it's already been reallocated. But the critical point is that the man speak with forked tongue. On one hand, we reinforce investment in traditional TV services. On the other, we say we don't need a traditional TV service because this audience has already gone online. To which the answer is sort of up to a point, Lord Copper. Yes, young people are going online faster than older people. Yes, they're consuming more TV that way, but the organisation and the profile that a TV channel brings is something that is very, very hard to replicate online. And as I say, Vice News, which is unquestionably meeting the needs and gathering the interest of young people, is now trying to move from online only to online plus TV channels.
Maybe there's a lesson there. Final question, and it, of course, is the TV licence. This is from an anonymous texter. I only watch BBC Three. Now, if it's on iPlayer, does that mean I can cancel my TV licence? I only ever watch catch-up.
The formal position is, if you only ever watch catch-up, in other words, you never watch TV as broadcast, by the way, not just the BBC, if you watch any TV as broadcast, ITV, Sky, whatever, you need a licence. So if you ever watch BBC News, ever, in the course of a year, technically speaking, you need a licence. If, however, it is true that you never watch TV as broadcast and only ever watch on demand, including BBC Three, then yes, technically, you do not need a licence.
Technically.
As things stand. Governments are reviewing it, might all change. BBC hopes it will. They want to close the so-called iPlayer loophole, which is what that's called. But yes, technically, if you only watch on demand, technically, as things stand, you do not need a licence.
OK, Steve, thanks very much for coming in.
You're welcome.
Thank you.